Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Round of Sound. We are live tonight with the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. I'm Bob Pompiani. Steelers, if you were watching, they won 20-15. They're 6-2 at their bye week. However, they still have a lot of things to iron out on offense. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Penguins and a meltdown tonight. Once again, back-to-back. That's a problem on the back half of the back-to-back. For the Penguins, we'll get into their 7-1 loss tonight. We'll also talk about that classic game yesterday, 39-38, where Ohio State came back and beat Penn State. You wonder how much this will hurt Penn State in the rankings. We're going to talk about that and more, but the #1 topic tonight on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown is the Steelers, who are 6-2, tied for the best record in the AFC. And here's your panel left to right. On your television screen, we have Jason Mackey, Penguins beat writer from the Post-Gazette. We'll be heading out on the road tomorrow. We have Tim Benz from the Trib and also Steelers Nation Radio and many other things that he does. And Paul Zeiss from the Post-Gazette and 93.7 The Fan. So let's get right into this. Zeiss, I want to begin with you. We're going to talk about 6-2. That's a nice record. And yet, the Steelers have not been able to finish off teams offensively. Their defense, even though they gave up yards tonight, I thought they were the heroes of this. They did not allow touchdowns to Detroit. They had to settle for all field goals. It's a pretty good offense to limit that to. Your take on where they are and how much of a concern is the red zone third down conversion part of their offense?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, again, we talk about it almost every single week. They talk about how they're going to average 30 points a game this year, and I don't think they're averaging 20, or if they are, it's like 19.8 or something. So a big part of that is the red zone. So to me, they've got way too much talent to not be able to score in the red zone, but you're halfway through the season, and I think one of the things they found the last 2 weeks is that Juju Smith-Schuster can become a pretty good weapon, and maybe he'll be somebody they can use down in the red zone to help them score touchdowns.
Kind of the opposite of that, Paul. Look at the weapons that they haven't gotten much out of. Whether Jesse James has been kind of hit and miss, Martavis Bryant, they've gotten absolutely nothing out of it. And I look at those two guys and think they're big-time third down red zone contributors, and it's been kind of scattershot with them.
During the course of this week in the Steelers locker room, Ramon Foster gave me the Aaron Rodgers line and said I should RELAX about the red zone woes and third down conversions because of the issues in the red zone and sometimes on third downs earlier in this game. None of us were able to relax until it was absolutely over. The amazing thing to me is they survived this game tonight because they managed to find another team in the world that's worse than they are in the red zone, and it just so happened to be in the same building as them. I can't believe that Detroit was as bad as it was in the red zone. I give a lot of credit to the Steelers defense for stiffening as much as it did and making some really big impact plays, a couple of them by Vince Williams, Sean Davis as well, Javon Hargrave too. But to the point that you made earlier, Bob, this is the first time they've really been tested on pass defense, and they allowed almost 500 yards in total offense.
Yeah, that's got to be a little bit of a concern, but then you're going against one of the best arm slingers in the game. I mean, Matthew Stafford can put things in small windows, and I think we saw that a lot tonight. I still was more impressed with the fact that they did not give up a touchdown. You know, Jason Mackey, when it comes right down to it, that's what a lot of these teams like to talk about. Just don't give up big plays that kill you, and they really didn't. They limited, and I think overall, I think their defense has been their best asset of the first 8 games, and I think that's good moving forward because I expect this offense to get better.
Yeah, Pop, but I think the water is finding its level a little bit, and I don't think the Steelers are as good as allowing 140, 150 passing yards per game. I mean, they're not that good. Let's be realistic here. They just played some really bad quarterbacks and bad opponents in the first half. Matthew Stafford is at the top of the heap as far as I'm concerned in terms of quarterbacks, and you saw a little bit of that today. And I don't think they're as bad as 400-plus passing yards allowed. It's somewhere in the middle, and it's bend but don't break. They have enough back there to get it done. Really like the Joe Hayden signing. If we're going to go name-checking guys, Tim mentioned Sean Davis, another one. And
Tyson Alualu.
Yeah, there's been a lot of nice additions. I think they're a very good defense, and they're 6-2 at this point. I mean, what are we going to complain about here?
I think the one thing about tonight, though, is they were as much of a product of the Lions being the Lions as they were anything they were doing. I think the other thing is the Lions proved if you can't run, which they have no running game at all. If you can't run the ball, it is really hard to be a good red zone team. If you don't score from far out, if you can't make a team worry about your running game, they can just sit 8 guys back there and whatever and feel comfortable that you're not going to try and run the ball. And that was part of the Lions. The Lions also had Golden Tate drop or fumble a ball. They decided not to go for a field goal even though they had showed no ability to get 1 yard. to me, I think the Lions being the Lions was a story in some ways in the red zone.
Yeah,
tonight.
I'll echo that. You think that Tom Brady and the Patriots go that many trips in the red zone without scoring a touchdown? Because
Well, they did today, actually.
Well, was it this bad?
They were 1 for 5 in the red zone today. So, I mean, even they can have bad days like this.
They can, but again, we have seen them lose the Patriots a lot of times over because they haven't capitalized when they've been in the red zone. And I don't think it's as much about play calling as it was earlier in the season. I just saw a lack of execution out there today, whether it was right at the red zone or in. The Le'Veon Bell fumble happened on the 21-yard lines. That one technically didn't count, but there were 2 short Boswell field goals again. There was the drop touchdown in the end zone from Eli Rogers. There was Ben overthrowing a wide open receiver, Darius Hayward-Bay, in the end zone. Lack of execution burned them far more than play calling. I was not wild about the pass call late in the game after they broke up that last red zone possession by the Lions on 2nd down. I thought they should have run the ball again there, but that was the only one that really leapt off the page at me in terms of play calling. I thought they missed a lot of opportunities that would have given them a lot more breathing room at earlier points in this game.
All right, I have just about a minute and a half, so I want to cram 2 questions into one, all right? So, Jason, one would be Ben Roethlisberger, because prior to the Juju Smith-Schuster 97-yard touchdown, which was a perfect throw from his own end zone, he had been erratic, and he's been sort of erratic, which is unusual for him. Are you concerned about that? And number 2, when you look at the way they've gone, what was I going to ask number 2? Was it? I have too many things happening in my head right now. But anyway, start with that one. Oh, no, I know what it was. Martavis Bryant. We didn't see him, of course, tonight, so he's going to come back after the bye. With Juju Smith-Schuster doing what he's doing, where do you see him fitting in? Is he behind him now? What role does Martavis Bryant have?
Yes and no, Pomp. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not concerned about Ben. I'm really not. And I know the throw, I kind of smiled whenever you said it. And I remember watching it on TV thinking, oh, man, you know, what was wrong with that throw? But then he comes back and hits Juju. No concern at all where he's at right now. A little bit more concerned about Martavis Bryant and how he fits back into this offense. Juju Smith-Schuster has taken advantage of him being out, has really taken the reins on that opportunity. At this point, I look at this offense and think, okay, 84-19, they're the best with those guys there, and where does Bryant fit in? I'm not quite sure. He's going to have a lot of proving to do when he gets back, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know if Ben can throw the Steelers back into games if they get down big like he used to be able to do. That's where I'd be concerned about Roethlisberger. As far as Martavis goes, you know, I'm on record as saying just quiche on him. Keep him in the press box. Don't trade him. Don't cut him. Don't give him what he wants, but quiche on him. You can get basically the same production out of Hunter. I don't want to have to do that, but, you know, so long as they win without him, don't give him what he wants.
Well, I think the biggest thing is you make him earn his spot back. I think if they do that and he does earn his spot back, I mean, to me, then you've got a really good receiver for the, you know, second half of the season down the stretch. But there's no reason in the world that you bring him back and say, okay, you're going to be ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster. I would say, you know, he should be active, but he's got to prove that he deserves that with the way he practices and the way he, you know, he gets opportunities in games, he makes plays.
Yeah.
Anybody check the Instagram account of the girlfriend yet tonight about Juju? We gotten any?
Silence, nothing.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, I saw some other Twitter comments that were rather interesting from other people, but not the girlfriend so far tonight. So, but the night is young, right? We have a lot more coming up. I know our show is young. We're going to delve into the Penguins, who, you might have missed this, but they lost tonight in Winnipeg 7-1. We'll talk about any concerns there. And later, Penn State, tough loss, critical loss potentially to Ohio State. How far will they fall in the polls? Tuesday is the first one for the playoff coming up. We'll talk about that and more. We are live tonight with the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown right here on KDKA TV. The #1 Cochran Sports Showdown is brought to you by #1 Cochran, Go One Better, and by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. Have a greater hand in your health.